Lights, camera, action. Do you have like one of those like paper things that's like that goes? Foot.
I do actually.
Quiet on the set.
Action.
Action. When is breakfast getting ready?
That's about it.
In the Clark home, kitchen conversations sizzle in life lessons. Handed down from father to son.
Generational wealth is property or money that you pass down for generations to come.
Even at just 10 years old, Jackson knows.
Okay.
Dreams are free, but wealth takes work. The first step, setting down roots. It's been 4 years since the Clarks bought this Columbia City home.
The homes are selling for over $1 million.
I'll go rinse this off.
Okay.
But while the Clarks were renovating,
Put in a new kitchen.
a home appraiser sent by their mortgage company told them the value of their home had gone down.
My agent asked me, how was the appraisal? I was like, oh, it came in really low. He's like, oh, what was it, 800, 900,000? And I'm like, no, it was in the sixes.
$670,000 to be exact.
It was quite amazing to have an appraisal that low in this neighborhood.
Earlier this year, Seattle real estate prices hit record highs. So Joe's appraisal seemed questionably low. According to Zillow data, the typical home value in Joe's neighborhood this spring was over $900,000.
I just want to make sure that we get the fair market value for the home.
So Joe staged an experiment. He scheduled a second appraisal and asked his white neighbor, Marta Ewell, to be his stand-in.
The objective was to see if you had a person that was not someone of color in the house, change the amount that he got for the appraisal to see if there was some kind of bias there.
Here we have the African art. I took these down as well.
Joe began the process of what he calls whitewashing his home.
This one here is a picture of my grandparents. It's a picture of my daughter at Christmas time. I took them down for the second appraisal.
And this time, when the new appraiser came weeks later, they saw Marta's white face instead of Joe's. The second appraisal came back over $300,000 higher than the first one.
We got the lower price and the neighbor got a higher price than what the house is worth.
Wait, what?
Yeah,
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
that's a bad thing for us.
Yeah.
I was mad that we had to go through that in order to get him an appraisal that was in line with what the rest of the neighborhood has.
Because it is part of our systematic racism that we have here in America.
We took a closer look into the differences between the two appraisals to find out how they could be so far apart.
It's taken away our generational wealth.
We know appraisals are largely based on what similar homes in the area have sold for, but
There's no set standard of what that is. Where they draw those lines differ.
and that can be a problem. Dr. Junia Howell is an urban sociologist and race scholar who studies home appraisal disparities across the country.
Am I surprised by this case? I've seen a lot of them. They're not an anomaly.
Take a look at Joe's first low appraisal from April. To assess the value, the appraiser chose comparable or similar homes that had sold up to 2 miles away for around $600,000 over the previous 6 months. Now look at Joe's second appraisal. It took into account some homes nearby sold for more than $1 million, including the home right next door to Joe's. Using that critical context to compare, the second appraisal was $300,000 higher.
Homes in communities of color are worth 70% less on average when holding everything else constant as homes in white neighborhoods. It's really insane.
That disparity adds up. A recent study by the Brookings Institute found the appraisal differences amounted to roughly $48,000 per home, or $156 billion cumulatively in majority black neighborhoods.
Because our black and brown families' homes are often devalued, they're often taken away from us.
Joe and his family are navigating a system that is deeply rooted in documented racist rhetoric. Appraisal manuals from the 1930s all the way to the 70s had perpetuated the belief that race was linked to value. Look at this manual from 1946. They ranked, in their words, Negroes and Mexicans at the bottom of this list of who brings value to a neighborhood. At the top, white Europeans.
That's racist and historically deeply problematic and contemporarily affecting real people's lives in ways that we can collectively push against and say we want and we demand better.
Such discrimination became illegal under the Fair Housing Act of 1968. But while the manuals may have changed, the diversity of the people determining home values hasn't. According to the U.S. Department of Labor, 96.5% of appraisers are still white.
We have to have those conversations about race that most other white families do not have to have.
He wants me to be successful in life.
We're fighting for the next generation.
For Joe, that means not worrying if the color of his skin will impact the value of what he can pass down to his kids.
So I wouldn't have to struggle or minimize those struggles as a black man in America.
Nice.
Several states and Congress are now considering legislation that would deal with these appraisal disparities. So far, Washington not on that list. If you feel like you've received a biased home appraisal, we have information about where you can report it. Text the word HOME to 206-448-4545. For Facing Race, I'm PJ Randhawa. The home ownership gap is worse today than it was in the 1960s because fewer black families own homes compared to white families. State data shows only 31% of black families in Washington own a home. On the other hand, the white home ownership rate is more than double that. Owning a home can be hard.
When I got the house, it was like, Keisha, don't you lose that house.
For Keisha Credit, keeping her home was even harder.
What is that?
My grandpa was super cool. He always wanted to do videos.
Well, you got it.
2 years ago, Keisha's grandfather passed away and left her his Central District home. It had been in their family for half a century.
Getting his house means that he's not here, and doing this without him was one of the hardest things I ever did.
The day after her grandfather's funeral, she received the first of many letters that were persistent and predatory.
The next day comes a letter saying, we want to buy your house.
She says they offered her $800,000. That's low in a neighborhood where some homes are selling for up to $3 million. So the business coach and entrepreneur turned to TikTok to share her experience.
They feel like, oh, these black families are going to lose their house the minute that somebody passes away, and let me be the first one to jump in and stake my claim. Not realizing that some of us know what's going on, and we are not telling.
She's teaching others to spot the same scams and tricks used to push people of color into selling their homes.
There's all these tactics that they use to try to scare you to feel like you are not able to stay in your land.
But those lowball offers were just the beginning. Soon, Keisha's mailbox was full of legitimate-looking collection notices, claiming she was behind on her property tax or owed money to the IRS.
When I started to get letters, I looked into it because I'm like, whoa, how did that happen? Was there something I missed? And then that's when I understood, like, wait a minute, this is not real. Their goal is to either get you into a terrible loan, sign over your house.
It's basically fraud, right? I mean, this is completely misleading information.
Dr. Angelique Davis is a professor of political science and African American studies at Seattle University.
These are very predatory practices. We've seen the effects of that with gentrification.
Keisha knows what losing the home would cost her in the long run.
So to think that we can sell now, get something, go somewhere else, and continue to multiply that, the opportunities are very low.
Once that wealth is washed away, it's not easy to start over.
My room was up top in the attic.
Just ask Katisha Atterbury.
A lot of nostalgia.
This house in Rainier Beach was her family home, purchased by her grandparents in the 1960s.
Growing up, it was fun. There were a lot of blacks in this neighborhood. It just brings back a lot of memories.
Those memories dried up when Katisha was a freshman in high school. She says her parents got a predatory loan they couldn't pay back, and that changed the course of her life.
The house went into foreclosure. I had plans to go to the UW, join the gymnastic team, and then go to the Olympics. That was my plan. And then with the loss of the home, that threw me off that course. I had to stay at my cousin's house, couch surfing, and that lasted for many years.
Data from real estate experts show when it comes to buying a home, the cards are stacked against black families from the get-go. It can take an average black household nearly 30 years to save for a down payment. Compared to white borrowers, African Americans are 2.5 times more likely to be rejected for a loan. That's partly because black families are more likely to have debt that banks see as risky for approving loans.
I mean, it's just like these double, triple layers of racism that are happening. Not only are you paying more for a home that's being valued at less, and then you're not able to use that to help leverage to build more wealth for you and your family.
Almost 2 decades and still have not been able to regain this.
15 years after losing her childhood home, Katisha is now a real estate developer, helping other black families buy homes.
There's so many barriers. When you hear people say, lift yourself up by your bootstraps, what they're not taking into account is the historic implications of being a person of color in this country.
Back in the Central District,
You guys think that it is not real that people come after your property when you got something, you got another thing coming.
Keisha's videos have reached millions.
The sentiments that I receive are, I'm so proud of you because we lost our family home.
She's hoping to turn the tide.
But you better figure out how you can win. And then when you figure out how to win, you better have other people win too.
By helping black families navigate the challenges of buying a home while she fights to keep her own.
That's the reason why I felt it worth it to save this. It's not just about your home as a place to stay. It is a generational opportunity, so you better fight for it because it matters.
If you need help buying a home, we have a list of state and federal resources that may be able to help. Text the word BUY to 206-448-4545. For Facing Race, I'm PJ Randhawa.
Join me here. Won't you be seated, please, ladies and gentlemen?
1971.
America's public enemy number one is drug abuse.
The U.S. declared war. The battlefield, inner cities across the country. The targets, predominantly poor people of color.
I know that we use the war on drugs to go after black and brown people.
When it comes to drugs and alcohol, just say no.
Now, this is where it all started here when it came to downtown Seattle.
My store was on this side.
Entrepreneurs like Mike Asai and Peter Manning lived through the fallout.
In the 80s, if you just simply had a joint, you would get 5 years in prison.
Decades later, the ACLU points out the lasting impact of the war on drugs, reporting that in every state with legalized marijuana, black people are still more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession. In some states, it's up to 10 times more likely.
You guys punished us for years for cannabis. It's okay now, you're doing it, now it's okay.
It's okay now because in 1998, Washington legalized medical cannabis. Mike and Peter saw it as a chance to get into the industry.
To be on the bad end when it comes to cannabis and then to convert to be on the good end was very empowering. Because of growing up and just seeing the war on drugs was really the war on African Americans, the war on black men, the war on black women.
By 2015, Washington state legalized recreational cannabis, and everyone had to apply for new licenses. This is where minority business people felt shut out of the process, saying they felt they couldn't compete with the white-owned, well-established cannabis companies that flooded in. The result? Black people lost out. According to state data, of the state's 558 recreational pot licenses, only 19, or 4%, went to black applicants.
And there is zero African American ownership in the city of Seattle. To be supposedly in this progressive state, it's not showing.
All right, well, I guess we'll go ahead and we'll just get started.
The BIPOC community immediately fought back, demanding answers and action from the Liquor and Cannabis Board, or LCB, during public meetings.
We feel disrespected. We're not listened to.
Between 2016 and 2019, the state commissioned 2 independent reports to audit LCB's enforcement program and investigate allegations of discrimination from licensees. They had been accused of handing over $1 billion industry to white licensees, failing to provide educational resources for applicants, and giving out inconsistent information to candidates that left some, like Peter, with rejected applications.
Do you see why people of color feel like they just can't catch a break?
Yes. I mean, even with this, what's the saying, a day late, dollar short?
Ollie Garrett is an LCB board member. She's also on the state's newly formed Social Equity and Cannabis Task Force.
So there are still no Black-owned dispensaries in the city of Seattle. And this is after 2 years of this task force in place. Do you call that a failure?
Yes. I would call that a failure, a missed opportunity. Could it have been done different in the beginning? Yes, but this was a new industry. Who knew? Who thought about inclusion and blacks being left out?
The people that were left out, they have a huge disadvantage now because they're missing 6 years in the industry. How do you fix that?
We can't go backwards, we just have to go forward.
So far, the plan to go forward is stumbling. The task force recommended setting aside 38 marijuana business licenses specifically for people of color. But state records show more than half of those licenses are in areas where pot sales are currently banned, essentially making them useless.
So what are you giving me? A license that says that I have the right to sell cannabis, but I can't sell cannabis because I can't open up in this location because it's banned? How's that equity?
Do you understand why some of the people in this realm feel like these are leftovers? They're being given scraps that they can't use.
Right now, the LCB cannot move license out of the areas that they're in or create new license without legislation.
Garrett says the LCB will request that legislation in the upcoming session.
So it'll mean a tremendous amount to me and my family get back to what we lost. We lost out on generational wealth.
Until that happens, these men want the public to be more conscious about where the money they spend on cannabis really ends up.
There's white-owned stores in our black neighborhoods. 10 years ago, you were locking us up for the same thing. White people are making millions of dollars. They're taking that money out of our community and they're putting it in the white community. We want our black-owned stores in our communities. Seattle, our communities, period.
Another recommendation of the task force, giving licensing priority to people like Mike and Peter, who used to own medical dispensaries. Now, the task force will submit its final recommendations and report to the legislature and governor on December 9th. For Facing Race, I'm PJ Randhawa.
Look, it's time to celebrate.
Looking at Richard Taylor,
Do you see what I see?
it's easy to see the warm smile, the confidence, the joy. But look closer,
I was able to see my mental health restored.
and you'll find the scars and the hurt that came before.
Talk about somebody who was at the lowest of lows and the darkest of darks, going through some really tumultuous mental health struggles. I use this tattoo as a reminder to always love myself. It could have ended very badly.
It started at the age of 10, when Richard set his sights on a blade.
Got home one day from school before my parents got home. I was like, well, maybe if I could just cut some of the fat off of my body, like, it would help me. It would change my physical appearance to where my peers wouldn't bully me anymore.
It was a cry for help that went unheard.
It was minimized, shut down from the standpoint of, you're too young to be dealing with this. Your ancestors dealt with worse.
As Richard grew up, he appeared on the outside to grow out of some of his problems.
I was a standout quarterback in the city of Chicago, playing football, scholarship offers galore. Every time I felt, an immense amount of mental or emotional turmoil, even it out with some kind of physical pain.
10 years later, that pain led him to another blade.
Started from here. Scars at the bottom are much larger.
This time in his college dorm room.
That day, I just kind of was at my wit's end. There were several situations that occurred that led me to a decision to take a blade down my wrist 5 times where the word love now sits. It was my breaking point.
These eyes have seen a lot. We've been through a lot.
Black Lives Matter!
Black people, we've always seen America as our country. We're vested in it. It's just America hasn't seen us as Americans.
Omari Salisbury understands how easy it can be to get to a mental health breaking point.
Don't shoot!
All right, good morning, everybody. It's me, Omari Salisbury.
During the summer of 2020, Salisbury, the owner of Converge Media, was on the ground in nearly every Seattle protest.
We're live back here downtown.
Following the murder of George Floyd.
I'm a real empathetic person. Like, I really be feeling it.
He witnessed the unrest firsthand. Omari was covering protesters on I-5 when a car drove straight into the group.
And I remember it vividly, a car entering the empty freeway, going around the barricaded cars, ran right into a group of protesters, killing Summer Taylor and critically injuring Diaz Love.
The trauma of that scene, combined with months of social unrest, pushed Omari to his mental limits.
For Black people, man, it don't ever go away.
Omari made the difficult decision. In order to take care of his mental health, he stepped away from the mic to focus on himself and his community.
So many people who walk around with so much pain and so much trauma and so much hurt. Let me help you connect the dots. Let me do my part. You know what I'm saying? Let me bridge that gap. Let me be of service to you, right? That's what I want to do. You know, I want to be of service to our community because I feel it. I feel it. It never left. It's never left.
According to the Journal of the American Medical Association, in the past 2 decades, suicide attempts for Black males between 12 and 18 have increased by 79.7%. Making Black kids and teens almost twice as likely to die by suicide than white kids. And it's not just kids at risk. The suicide rate for Black adults increased by 30% between 2014 and 2019.
When we talk about triggers, it doesn't take much for people.
Black Americans experience mental health issues at a rate similar to their white counterparts. But according to the American Psychological Association, they are much less likely to seek help.
It's often thought of as actually being a weakness.
Dr. Devin Bird is a trained psychologist and president of Bastyr University.
Black men historically have been a lot of pressure in terms of presenting oneself as being strong and not needing outside help or assistance.
Richard said it was an attitude that growing up applied to everyone.
You could just simply say, oh, that's just crazy Uncle Billy over there, right? But not realizing that crazy Uncle Billy really needs help.
Experts say another barrier to seeking help is a lack of representation. 84% of psychologists are white, while only 4% are Black.
We need more therapists of color. We need more individuals who are able to resonate with and understand the experiences of communities of color.
And that brings us back to Richard, his last suicide attempt in his dorm room.
5 gashes going down my wrist from my final attempt.
Was enough to break through to his family and finally get into therapy.
Hallelujah.
He's now an author, church leader, and motivational speaker.
We just say thank you today.
And hopes to shatter the stigma surrounding mental health treatment that is crushing so many Black families in silence.
We have so many of us living in silence, and unfortunately, if we live in silence for too long, we can make a decision to where we're not here anymore. Be able to rise from the ashes of defeat, sorrow, depression. The message is hope.
For Facing Race, I'm PJ Randawa.